We've been asked many times why we choose to focus on standard in our analysis videos. Why focus on a dying format that only has relevance for the most annoying of new player spikes? Am I right? But I'm really here to tell you, dear viewer, the standard is actually alive and well. Me and the Darkstream analyze and assess many decks each week, watching for shifts, evolutions, the passage of new decks into standard's weekly metas. New brews, old archetypes, off meta jank all seem to find a way to make it through, even under our microscope. We read a recent article by Zach Hill, ex developer at Wizards, who helped design some of the more beloved sets from 2010 era onward, including some of the Ravnica based sets. This piece, the Standard Cube, I want to say, argues specifically that the design theories and priorities that could make Standard a flagship format again are possible. You read that piece and you come away with a feeling of hope for the future of the format. Hell, many of the design principles advocated for and showcased in that piece are actually seeing some sort of manifestation now in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So why are we now reading that Sam Black, another well-known MTG personality, is actually calling for the death of Standard in his follow-up to that piece, titled Standard No Longer Makes Sense for Magic? I'm here with my loyal comrade, Luis Dragon, and fellow guildmage of the Rebellion, Griffin Rider. Jump right into this latest hit piece on one of our more beloved formats and discuss the relevance of Standard to Magic the Gathering. So let's get right into it. All right, so we're here with Luis Dragon, Griffin Rider MTG. I want to ask first, Luis, how are you? How are you doing? What have you been up to lately?
Hey Max, how are you doing? Thank you for having me here another day. I'm doing fine. I've been enjoying a lot the new set. A little less than I expected, but I mean, it's an opinion that I will later explain more. But
That's
I
fair.
am enjoying the set. I think the cards are very well balanced, and it's a fun set. More than anything, it's like. So that you can have fun and have your big creatures or big dinosaurs. Maybe they are not like top tier, but at least you can say, "Oh, I can bring my big T-Rex to the game." So I'm having fun in that space.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Luis. We're definitely going to talk about Standard, and a lot of that conversation centers around the new set and what sort of impact it's having. Griffin Rider, how are you? What have you been up to lately?
I'm doing great. Uh, kind of wrapping up RCQ season out here. It's been real fun seeing where some of these cards are starting to fall into the more eternal formats. Had a had a big battle over the weekend over who got to cast Get Lost
Hmm.
in order to prevent some big creatures from coming back into play. So it's been fun seeing where things shake up and where they fall. But what about you, Max? How are you doing? What have you been up to?
Oh man, hanging in there from a very busy week. I know we just recorded the State of the Meta, and if you haven't seen it already, go see it because things are a little I don't want to say up in the air, but I don't think we got to talk about as many decks as are relevant really right now in Standard. And that goes along with my feelings about this article and this next one. I think Lost Caverns of Ixalan shook things up a little bit in terms of giving creatures power, creature based strategies power, and that's the opposite of the direction that Standard was kind of going in for a while, which is more towards control, more towards tempo, more towards mid range. So I don't know. We'll see. The verdict is still out, but after this week one, I'm excited to be playing, for example, Boros aggro. Like I couldn't play Boros aggro a couple of months ago or a month ago, right? But that's actually a viable tier one list at the moment. So I'm having a lot of fun actually just playing like arena standard. Um,
That's gonna be the deck I really dive into once I can focus on standard again. Is this Boros aggro deck?
oh yeah.
Yeah, it seems extremely fun.
Yeah, it does. And I added Immodane's Recruiter to it, and it gives it some power. And I like that you can go in a couple of different directions with it too. And the new cards have an impact. It's not just the same boring strategies coming back or anything like that. It's new cards. They're actually enabling it. Um, but Thank you guys for being here. This is, if you can't tell in the promo to this video, I've already said that I hated the article we're going to talk about second. Hate is a strong word, but I don't know. I think when you talk about somebody's article, I think it's fair if the opinion is just so counter to how you into it and how you feel and believe about the thing they're discussing. So for me to say hate is actually appropriate. But first, we really need to establish what was said in the initial piece that article was supposedly in response to, sort of, kind of. This was the original article that, in all the discussions about Sam Black's piece, it really got lost, is that this piece said it like just a few days prior, said a lot of the major points in that piece, in Sam Black's piece, but said it better, in my opinion. So I'm gonna run through a generous summary. No editorializing here. I'm just gonna run through what the major points in this piece was, so that you can see, in light of this piece, Sam Black's article about standard. Anyway, go look at my social media posts. In any case, let's go down the line, and I'm just gonna talk about this piece. The whole point of the article is supposedly to show how standard could be designed better to make it align better as the flagship format. So part 2, which we won't get to, showcases this through this design of a standard cube. What cards would be in a cube that exemplify the best design principles for standard? This is based on his experience as a developer for some of the sets that were, of course, in standard during a time where there were blocks. So we'll touch on that just a bit later. I think I want to just summarize the points point by point and really get to just the meat of this piece. So right here we have the 3 major points, 3 objectives in his mind that standard is attempting to achieve for Wizards. Number 1, we need a rotating format that creates new demand for more game pieces. These new pieces stand a chance because of rotation. So whereas eternal formats, a lot of cards are just irrelevant, right? And that is basically because it is formatted in such a way that, the more powerful combos are around forever. There's no rotation. So what's true in the past is true in the future. It's, that's how Modern's played. That's how Legacy is played. So those are things that you have to deal with in eternal formats. Standard is supposed to be the thing that stands against that, right? The standard bearer, so to speak, and this leads into point 2. Standard is essentially an on-ramp to more historical formats and to understanding those cards. So there is actually a bridge between this format and draft, I want to say, as well. That gets lumped in there as well. Between draft and standard to, modern, pioneer, whatever. There's a bridge there. You begin to learn the mechanics, you learn what cards are viable, what the power levels are relative to each other across sets. You learn that by playing standard. Point 3, it creates what he calls an essential experience of gameplay. So Zach Hill goes through a lot of trouble in this article to define what that means. From what you need to know, TLDR, essentially, this is new design mechanics and environments that can be introduced and not have to contend with 30 years of cards, for example. So an essential experience of gameplay, sort of kind of like a cube, which is why he designs a cube in part 2. But an environment that isn't affected by the outside as much, where new players especially, but old players too, can experience new mechanics, refreshed ideas that leave, but then come back at later sets, back into relevance. So an essential experience of gameplay. I think he goes on to say, is standard the only format that does this? No, not really, but it does so in an automatic and low friction way. Meaning it does this without pissing off older players, I assume is what that means, because, right, it doesn't affect modern. Standard is its own format where you can house this essential experience of play. 3 objectives that he thinks, so for the player, what does standard have to offer? This is the 3 things that he thinks standard players get out of playing standard. So what's the reward? Why would you want to play standard? Number 1 is summed up by the word novelty. It's a non-artificial way to introduce new cards that actually see play and don't, as I said earlier, piss off long-standing players in eternal format. So you get to play with new cards and they're relevant. Number 2, organic ways of acquiring cards. So you have drafts, you have prizes from, winning competitions. Set mastery and arena is lumped into this category. These make your cards more available to put in decks now. So there are rewards for continuing to play. Drafts are part of that competitive process that allows you to obtain new cards that then become cards in standard, that then become cards in older formats. And then he brings up a third point, that there needs to be an alignment. The player is looking for an alignment between excitement over big cards, like your Dreadmaws, and expectations as far as how those cards actually play. So big cards are worth getting excited over, and I really want to highlight that point as one of the center points of the article and the center point of the whole discussion. Is both articles will agree on this point, that there need to be an alignment between expectation and the excitement, the initial excitement over a card. So these cards need to be viable in some playable format, especially for beginners who get excited about their 5-mana Lyra Dawnbringer, right? He uses as an example. So here's the highlighted portion. Zach's most important assertion is that while a great deal of attention has been given to the first 2 dimensions of the equation, the third is equally, if not more important. So this is where he's criticizing Wizards, just like we all are. We all tend to agree on this point here. I think I need to bring that up first. We all agree there is some criticism that needs to be lobbed at Wizards for paying attention to the first 2 elements, but not paying enough attention to making more cards viable, playable, exciting in Standard. So what's his belief? Zach believes, quote, a format called Standard should exhibit a standard, i.e. in accord with a set of consistent expectations, experience across the range of all Magic sets, commensurate with a style of gameplay that aligns naturally with the core norms and game mechanics of Magic. So basic expectations of the game should be set by this format. You can't really have Magic without this format that we're calling Standard. Zach believes that basically what brought this back after Standard suffered its first slump in the 2008s era. Lorwyn wasn't a very successful set. For example, the NWO, the New World Order, not from wrestling, but this idea before Fire. This design idea that Wizards had that basically said 2 things. Magic's most appealing cards should be viable to play in Tier 1 decks. So not just viable, but viable in Tier 1 strategies. No more Mirrodins, right? No more artifacts versus non-artifacts. That was a nightmare, by the way. That was the Standard set I came into. The cards, secondarily, the cards together embody a play pattern that lends itself to cognitive coherence. This is where, your Vorthos community gets a tiny bit of say. The cards should align with some element in the theme of the set, the theme of the story, so to speak. And that's one part of that. That the cards should align in their design with what the card is, right? Goblins should do goblin-like things. For example, wizards should do wizards-like things. So, and it's summed up by this highlighted portion. The cards together embody a play pattern that lends itself to cognitive coherence. And then he goes on, we're almost done with this first piece. He goes on to say, in one paragraph, not the whole article, you'll see Sam Black go into a bunch of different reasons stretched out over the course of the article. But one paragraph, and he's very humble about whether he knows that this is the case or not, is why did Standard decline? He only lends one paragraph to this, and I can list it for you. Demographic expansion of the player base. So it has to appeal to more kinds of people. Arena, and maybe I'll contend with him here. Arena was part of the decline. I'm not sure exactly what he means by that, but he lists it. Bans. Too many bans. The pandemic, because, hey, if we're being realistic, that really cut paper play down and affected Standard most of all. Organized play restructuring, how they do tournaments, GPs being gone, blocks, so going back to individualized sets. And the one thing that Sam Black makes way too much a fuss of, in my opinion, too many new collectible products. So collector boosters, Universes Beyond, all of that. What are the solutions? So highlight this piece too, because when we talk about Sam Black's piece, I will also ask the same question. What does Sam Black think we should do about it? We're both very different here. Essentially, he says, envision what standard ideally looks like, number one. Number two, enumerate the design criteria based on that vision. And number three, designate all game design resources toward assuring that experience. So, design better, essentially. And then finally, here's the warning. He says, when a standard format withdraws from the essential standard experience, players become more drawn to the economic advantages of other formats. So no wonder we're talking about the cost of cards, the reserve list, reprints. No wonder that's part of the conversation, because now most players are thinking about their collection and how to preserve the value of that. But we've gotten there because standard is in a slump, according to this piece. So I'll give you guys room. I want to offer a substantial space to the crew, give their thoughts on this article alone, before we dive into Sam Black's response. So I'll start with Griffin Ryder. As a paper player, you have a unique perspective on this, in addition to having done content on Arena. So what are your takes on any of the things that Zach brought up on this article?
I have that fun crossover of both playing paper, playing on Arena, and being one of the collectors. I like cracking packs. I mean,
Yep.
it's fun to get those flashy, shiny cards. But even to that point, having all of these extra collectibles, having these high end prints of cards makes the draft pack version of that card even more accessible to people. It drives down the cost of your basic bottom of the line copy of your specific card you're looking for. If there's 8 copies of a card, it's easy to acquire those cards. It's it's nice to have the insight from a former dev. It's something us as players don't often get. I loved reading through this article. I loved getting that insight. And my biggest issue though is when you say you want your premier cards to be tier 1 playable. That means, especially when you get closer to rotation, those big cards have to be bigger and bigger. And that's when we get into power creep, and that's when we start getting into too many bands. And it's a cycle that I don't think anybody's figured out yet. Like, how do we balance having big flashy creatures and big flashy spells that people want to play, but not to the point that it completely warps the format for us and has to ban everything? Because I was there in the original Eldraine into Theros when we had like 20 cards banned in standard. It felt like it was a rough time just trying to maintain a playable collection. So I mean, I think there's a way out, and I want to talk about that more after we get through the other article. But for the most part, I really enjoy reading Zach's insight on what it was like in the trenches, in the development room. Like,
For those of you that want to go check out the companion piece on Standard Cube Part 2, you can get, and we can kind of hash out like which standard look like. I understand the power creep issue that you bring up. It's definitely an issue, and it has been for several years in Standard, and it might be one of the reasons why things are the way they are. But in this Standard Cube piece, you get an idea for what he means by, like your Gristle brands, right? Gristle brands should be, in his mind, a playable card, especially at the mythic rarity. But here's just a rough, like, here's 4 different things. Spotlighting mechanics that sit at this intersection of one, generally pretty popular. So mechanics that are popular to use: adventure, kicker, flashback, convoke, landfall. Those are all fun mechanics. 2, interact broadly with a large array of desirable effects: afterlife, bargain, devotion, eternalize, unearth, aftermath, food tokens. 3 lead to high visibility inflection point experiences, I think are good for lending coherence to gameplay. So here's where he brings up battles and sagas. And then number 4, load bearing for consistency and variance reduction. So land cycling, clues. I imagine map tokens would fall into this category. So I guess he's saying if you have a good balance of all these different mechanics that are well represented across the different colors, then you can sort of offset some of the problems that you get from power creep. Nonetheless, I think you're right to bring that up, and that's something that I don't think either author addresses in any of these pieces. So I don't know. That'll definitely be another conversation that we can have. But Luis, I want to get to you as well. What is your take on the initial Zach Hill piece where he's just talking about how to fix standard and about the design mechanics?
First of all, I enjoy a lot reading this article, especially because it's a developer of Magic, so it has a very different insight than all the players do have. So I will start with one of the things he says. He said, for example, massive demographic expansion of the player base. Yes, this can this could be led to the death of well, to the problems that standard is currently having, because we have a format that is more friendly oriented, that you can play with more friends, that is Commander. um so yeah, I understand when you have 4 friends. When I used to play Magic in paper, I remember that when I was playing with someone else and we have other friends, normally they were watching you the match or they were spectating, but now they can interact more. It's it's a very good thing, but it's extremely different from a standard. I think that there is place for both formats without killing one each other, and we have to stop segregating or keep gating the each of us. I mean, we are enjoying the same game in different way. As someone who plays a lot of video games, I will say also, and I wanted to talk about this in more in depth in the next article, but Griffin already touched it. The power creep. Mm, I think one of the best things that Magic has is the rotation. When I first started playing, I do not understand why it had the deck that took me 1 year to make it. It was not valid anymore because it was rotating out. But then, I will talk more about later. But seeing some other games that have eternal format, they are a mess right now. I understand how hard for all the games, any game you play, keep balance. It's very hard for every game to have a very, very well balanced meta. Every time you introduce something new, you are risking to break the mold and to make an overpowered situation. Things I think that Magic could do in this regard. Not I do not look like a lot bans, but when a certain card is killing the new cards, I think sometimes it's necessary. When este other thing I think that is killing standard, or not killing it, but it's making sometimes a little boring, and I will shoot in the foot here to the Rebellion, is the states of the meta. Why? Before we had internet, before we had this information available all the time to how to make the best deck and how to make the best approach to everything, it was more like a discover time, and the decks were passed down from voice to voice, or sometimes with the magazines. So it was not as easy as like, I don't want to build a deck. Let me see what is winning more. What's the thing is, humans are we expect like everything we do give us gratification. So it's difficult when you're trying to make a new deck, seeing failing and failing and failing, and try to adapting it. When it's easier to go to any meta and see the most, oh, this is tier one. The people want to win. It's normal. I mean, we want the gratification to win, but as we have so much accessible information from minutes, from hours ago, yeah, we always have seen that a deck makes very well on a tournament, and everyone is playing that week. That make in an environment as Arena, where you can play and play and play and play and play, and you don't have very much interaction. As good game, good game, good game, your turn, your go, or the ropes. I mean, it can make standard a little more boring because you are going to see the more prominent decks. But I mean, it's normal. It's now a thing that every game, anything, any card game, any game, we are going to see the meta always be more present because people want to win. I mean, nobody likes to lose. So
I think you're being fair in one regard, but I'm gonna have to push back just a little bit, of course, because we do make the content. I think in regards to design, first with design, I think if you design better, you avoid the problem of bans, right? That's ideally the situation you want. So if they did design Lost Caverns of Ixalan well, then we're not going to see as many bans in this set as we have seen in the past. Hopefully, that's definitely something that they need to look at, is designing sets where you got to balance your power creep. You can't eliminate it. You have to balance it, but you balance it with mechanics, a variety of archetypes, reviving old archetypes. If you're going to create a 3-year rotation, why not use it to your advantage and go ahead and revive stuff from Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, make that stuff relevant again. But in any case, to your point about the state of the metas and how information, really, you're talking about net decking and information, and how that has lent us a game of Magic that is now very, I want to say, predictable.
repetitive.
Right, like predictable. Like you can tell what your opponent's playing by the first couple of turns, by the lands that they put out. Right, you start to see Rafine's Tower. You're playing Esper mid range. I think I want to say two things about that. One, I think best of one standard lends itself more to that problem, specifically in Arena, than best of three. I think best of three mitigates against that quite a bit when you have sideboarding, when you have cards available in a majority of colors that do a specific sub archetype, like artifact enchantment removal, for example. You have that across a couple of different colors. And that lends its point to Zach Hill saying, design mechanics across the colors represented well. And then the second point I want to raise is that I think the information, I used to actually, when I started playing Arena, I used to think the same way, that the information was making the games a lot more stale, and that knowing the meta was hampering our ability to be creative. But I think that's why, for example, we went out of our way to go ahead and introduce Brewer's Corner to the show. Because not only are those tier 2.5, tier 3 possible decks, we allow jank in there so that we can hopefully spur people on, try and build solutions to those cards that are in domain, for example, that nobody else is really thinking about. I think tournament play, which is why I balance a lot of my competitive Magic with some of the jank casual side of Magic, because I'm trying to think creatively about solutions to old problems, new solutions. So I think that's part of that process. You have to balance being competitive and knowing the meta with always being aware that there are cards outside those decks that nobody's looking at that you could take advantage of. So I think it's a dynamic that's still in play, but Wizards even if that's the case, Wizards is going to have to design these sets better. And the verdict is still out if Ixalan is one of those good sets. Luis, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I wasn't trying to shoot like the state of the meta.
Oh no, I get what you meant. I get what you meant by that.
No, but the thing is, like, watching this last state of the meta, I enjoy it a lot. Seeing one new deck but it's only one new deck.
Right.
The problem I see with Wizards sometimes is like they're the last sets has been, I mean, like this last Elder Rain didn't have much impact, but I think the ideas were fun. Ixalan is the Lost Commons of Ixalan is having more impact. I think it's very fun, but they tend to miss the spot sometimes with a card. We have one card that is extremely prevalent in all the decks. We
I assume
have
you mean
another card.
Cavern of Souls, right? Is that what you mean?
I know. I wish I was talking about the new cards. I am talking about is the Shoulder.
Oh, you're talking about old cards.
Shoulder.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is like when you're making your standard 3 years, you need to be very careful about not making these cards that will go in like more than 50% of the decks. And if there is black, there is Shoulder. Well, some decks don't play. I mean, there are obviously exceptions, but then we have like Atraxa, another card. I think that it will be very well balanced if it wasn't so easy to have so much color mana in the moment. But we have some other. I know it went back down to tier 2, but it's still present. It's more present on the ladder. That I know you're making your games about and your states of the meta for the tournament, but a lot of people play standard for the ladder in Arena. I think that Arena has one of the heaviest and more impactful standard players. I mean, it's the number one played according to the information they gave us last September. The format that most played is standard. So we have. I think that if they want to keep 3 years, and I love the idea that they have 3 years, because with the separation of the this is the blocks. That I mean, when I started playing, it was also in Mirrodin. I loved Mirrodin. Contrary to I mean, I was very excited about every expansion of Mirrodin because when you play Mirrodin and you expect a new expansion, you said, "What is going to go out so I can add to my deck and make it better?" Now that we are having separate sets, it's not like, what I am going to add to my deck? It's more like, what new decks are going to come out? So if you're making this idea that we are having separate sets with now we have Dinos and we have a return of vampires, that we are seeing that these 3-year plans can work very well because we have vampires from Midnight Hunt and the other one Crimson Bow. Now that we can add it, the new excellent vampires, but this all is killed. This whole idea is killed if we have some prevalent decks that cannot compete, that the new cards cannot compete with.
I feel you, Luis. I feel you. There's some deep emotions. No, for real, because I really do get where you're coming from as somebody who, I mean, you like to brew and you like to get excited about new cards just like me. So I understand.
Yeah.
I understand your feelings on that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next article. This one I'm going to be a little bit less generous in summarizing. Yes, I will be editorializing a bit. Yes, we'll leave rooms for comment. Okay, so with all that said, let's turn our attention over to Sam Black and his article, Standard No Longer Makes Sense for Magic. All right, so right off the bat, he's going to claim the article that we just talked about, the Zach Hill one. He even links it, says, I brought up some things I hadn't really thought about that I'd like to expand on. Okay, now I bring that up because I'll let you decide for yourself if you go read the piece, but I don't think he does that. I don't think he talks in light of that article. judge for yourself. He does credit two normative things in Standard in the past, just like Zach Hill, that have sort of held it together as a format, right? That Draft and Limited gave us an organic way to have cards to play with in Standard. That's kind of a, that's kind of a dub point, like, of course. But also that block formatting made it easier to reference the different time periods, the different kinds of standards, so you could compare across sets better when you had blocks. And I think also to Luis's point earlier, I think you would add to that it was more thematically coherent when you had blocks. Like, we've gotten away from that in a sense. I think Zach Hill also raises that point as well, though. All right, so he immediately goes into this argument about product releases, because they don't work this way anymore. Standard is primarily there, according to him, to create demand for new cards. Quote, huge portion of cards that are released are actually never legal in Standard. So we've heard this point on social media, we've heard this point time and time again, that the majority of cards released aren't legal in Standard, and that's been a constant refrain, so why then have Standard at all? Interesting. Let's move on. New players, according to him, are brought in by the appeal of Universes Beyond, so they might see their favorite franchise represented in Magic and come over for that reason, and EDH. The quote is, new players aren't just not directed to buy Standard cards, they're typically directed not to. And my whole editorial piece to that is, I wonder why that is, Sam. When you have several content creators, influencers in that space, pushing this product, pushing the EDH product only because that's the sector of their fan base that takes up that space, right? They have EDH fans who want to see EDH pods, so they're going to push EDH product. Sam Black is no different. Sam Black is an EDH player, pushes EDH very heavily, pushes Modern as well. So of course you're going to see throughout this piece, that's what he pushes. That's what he talks about. That's who his article is directed at. He says precons are actually better than buying Standard packs for finding new cards and building up your collection. So here it seems like he turns his attentions to collectors and says, if you want to collect all the cards, this is your best way to do it. Just buy the precons that come with, the new artwork and everything. Most cards and collector boosters, he says, aren't Standard legal anyway. You still have to hunt basically to build a deck to go play in Standard. I want to interject here though, because he jumps back and forth between this casual hat and his competitive hat, and he said, "Isn't that also true of like Modern and Pioneer as well?" Like beyond
There's
the
so much wrong with this take here. I don't even know where to begin with it. Like, the collector packs, no, half that pack is not full of non-legal cards. You get like one or two of the
Yeah.
commander sets, but 13 other cards are all Standard legal. Don't try and pass that off. And let's flip it here for a minute. What if Wizards put out 4 Standard legal beginner decks every set instead of 4 commander decks? Then why not have your new players walk up and buy a Standard deck to play with their friends instead of a commander deck? Like, it's all in how Wizards is pushing the product.
Exactly.
We didn't have that in the past. I mean, with every new set, it came like 4 or 5 standard decks that were precon. I'm pretty sure that when I used to play Paper, we had like the Core 8, and it has their pre-armed decks that nobody buys by them.
I had some Kamigawa ones.
Because it has good cards, but you need to complete the deck. I think that Commander is the same. I don't believe that a precon has all the cards that you need.
Yeah, look at how many channels and content creators make their money off of, here's how you mod your precon, here's how you update your precon.
Or just telling us how the mana base and the precons are absolutely horrible, and Wizards should be ashamed of them. So, the same thing would happen if they put out a Standard deck. Like, we've seen it. They've tried to push these beginner decks, and everybody says it's garbage, don't buy it. And then Wizards stops producing them because nobody buys them.
The thing is that Commander is not competitive.
We'll get to that.
So they
We'll
so
get
they
to
can
that.
sell everything.
Right. We'll get to that because I think he blurs the line between casual and competitive here to endorse his own position, and I'll try to point out where he does that. He goes on to say that even the bonus sheet and draft packs, the one card you get adds to his argument. So I don't know why he goes there. And then he goes even further to say that he enjoys draft for the small card pool, but enjoys EDH and modern for the large card pool. So like he can hop back if he wants his small card pool, he'll just pick up a draft, right? So just more examples of him really switching the hats here between casual and competitive. And like, who is this article aimed at? Like, it can't just be aimed at himself. If it's aimed at himself, all of this makes perfect sense. But my whole point is, if this is aimed at a specific audience of Magic players, who is it aimed at? Because he is never clear on that. He does give some credit to Standard, saying Standard can be a bridge since you can attain only legal cards and packs, and it offers fast testing with Arena. He even says Standard almost makes sense as an Arena-only format. So he's saying the accessibility, the access to lots of games is a good thing if you're competitively minded, after he just got done saying that the accessibility is a problem. I'm not sure. It's rough because he's mixing digital and paper and the demands of casual and competitive, and those are different audiences. He also goes on to say that you need, this is the line that kills me. I want to find it here before I here it is. I'm going to quote it. Standard almost makes sense as an Arena-only format because a lot of the supplemental products aren't available on Arena. So this argument that Universes Beyond is diluting new cards and they aren't Standard legal, why play Standard? But then Arena created its own supplemental products and its own explicitly Arena-only formats. So now Standard can kind of be defined as containing the recent cards that exist both on Arena and in paper, and it offers a bridge between those platforms. As a competitive player with a large Arena collection, I'll admit that there's some appeal to that. If there's a paper Standard tournament, I can test for it on Arena, but it's almost impossible for a format, here's the line, to be supported entirely through tournament support. There needs to be grassroots interest. Sam, you just pulled that word out of your butt. What does grassroots interest mean? Is that
I
like...
wanted to ask.
Is that... I'll tell you what it means. He's saying that you have to have a casual audience for a format for it to exist, which is...
So how does Pioneer and Modern survive? How does Vintage and Legacy survive? They're not casual formats. Nobody sits down casually and says, I want to play Modern today. Like...
The Darkstream does, but he's a weirdo.
Well, he's a sadomasochist, so
yeah,
like he said,
is.
he likes his chicks clap. So
yeah, he does.
But...
like I love that meme. That was hilarious. Oh, but seriously, I think he's mixing audiences again. And then it's like he goes into that, and then he talks about. Let me quote this next piece about how he imagines Standard going for people who are entering. He says, I can't really imagine who the casual audience would be for Standard. That's an oxymoron. But anyway, how anyone would get into it or why they'd stay with it rather than graduating to other formats. You just talked about a casual for Standard. There's no casual for Pioneer. There's no casual for Modern. So that makes even less sense. Then he says, maybe Wizards creates a strong incentive for stores to host Standard tournaments. And then the reason to play Standard is to be able to participate in paper events. But I think such a move is... Okay, before I say this, let me tackle what he just said. Isn't that exactly what Wizards just announced they're doing in 2024? Is
Yes.
promoting Standard in the stores, creating more Standard tournaments?
Sure is. Let's get away to get butts back in seats again.
Exactly. And then he says, but I think such a move is too adversarial with player and retail interests. So you just assumed your own argument right there. Too adversarial. So, like, dude, this is driving me nuts. Here's the note I wrote down actually when he said that. He's moving the goalposts worse than Tennessee fans when they beat Bama at Knoxville last year. For those of you who don't watch football, when Tennessee beat Bama, they tore down the goalposts. carried it over the side of the stadium and down to the river and dumped it in the river. That's how far Sandblack has shifted the goalpost with that one gaslighty statement right there.
Okay.
Too adversarial with player retail interests. So, like, what are we supposed to do? Oh, man. So, I wrote down also, oh, but Modern already has a dedicated following, so it doesn't have to follow any of these rules I just basically established. Because he goes on to say, Modern allows players to play with more new cards and also doesn't ask players to keep up with rotation, also already has a dedicated following. Just, he posits that Standard should die for competitive reasons and for casual reasons, and then says, but play Modern, but also play EDH. It just, I'm going to round it out by saying, I'll let you talk, Griff, in just a second. I just want to, final quote. He says, and this is also a very gaslighty thing that he says, Magic is a social game, and people want to play with their friends. Everyone wants to play the same format, right? What if you don't have any friends? That's why we play Arena.
I'm alone in my life.
He also goes on to assume, he says, like, when Commander players and Standard players are in the same LGS, that he just assumes in the article also that Standard players are just going to convert to EDH and not play Standard anymore. But the opposite could also happen. So I don't know. It's just, it's very inconsistent. It's a hard to follow article. And a lot of the social media interpretation was, like, he makes a lot of good points, but I think that's just folks who didn't read the first piece that he was responding to. What's your take so far, Griff?
It's hard to sit here and say Modern doesn't have rotation or has to worry about rotation, because not only have we seen waves with just Standard sets, most of the enfranchised Modern players are going to tell you we have artificial rotation with every single Horizon or Universes Beyond set that comes in. uh Lord of the Rings changed everything. Modern Horizons 2 changed everything. There is rotation. It's not like we're playing the same decks we played 5 years ago. So to try and tell me that we don't have to keep up with it, that's some hoops you got to jump through to come to that conclusion. Like, there's a lot of talking points in this article where you have to really stretch the truth and jump through some hoops to get to your point.
Yeah. He rounds it out by basically throwing his hands in the air. Right? Let me find the quote. Would Standard be better if players could play every new card printed? And that's his whole point, by the way. He says, I don't know, but if the alternative is a format that no one plays, it doesn't seem like there's much risk. Again, he's assuming the thing that he's arguing for in that argument, which is very cyclical. And then he goes on to say, what about Arena? Standard is the format it has in common with Paper, but every new card gets printed on Arena. Would it be feasible to put every new card on Arena? I have no idea. Is there a lot of value in these things lining up? I don't know that. How should this interact with Pioneer? And this is the only time he brings up Pioneer, by the way, which shows you, like, Pioneer doesn't even exist. He plays Modern and EDH. If new cards are legal in Standard, would those cards also be legal in Pioneer? If they are, what about cards from Commander sets that came out while those cards weren't Standard legal? Like, these are questions nobody's asking. This is all already settled by how the formats work. These questions are difficult, and I don't know the answers. I think that sums up in his conclusion pretty well what he's saying. Like, he really doesn't know the answers, and I just have to ask, what was the damn point then?
Okay.
Luis, go ahead.
Can I interject? Okay.
Absolutely.
I will quote something that he also says in the article. So what can be done about this? This option is simply to sunset standard as a format. Blah 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 blah. As a tournament player, I rather have fewer formats at this point. Blah 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 blah. There are too many formats for me to try to keep up with all of them. If there were fewer, I could maybe maintain a deck for each. Okay, let's start for the first thing. Standard is a format that doesn't affect anyone. It's the format where the new cards the new story cards, because if we remember, Magic is a game that has a lore behind it. So standard is where the new cards with the lore, the story that is continuing in the universe is happening. The other sets, the Lord of the Rings, the Marvel, the Jurassic Park, they don't have a story in Magic. Second of all, hmm, okay, say I have most cards for several modern and pioneer decks, but I don't know if I have anything. So we also have to sunset modern and pioneer because you don't know if you have all the cards. I mean, you cannot defend a format like modern when it has a ton more of cards, a ton more interactions, and you can put a new gamer to modern, it will be destroyed. Even in EDH, that they have a way impressive quantity of cards. I mean, it can be overbearing, but EDH is a more friendly format, so maybe they will let live the new player until he's more. He has more experience. But there are too many formats for me to try to keep. First of all, nobody needs to keep track of all the formats. If you don't like a format, don't mess with it. You don't have to have every card, to have every expansion, to have everything. I don't want to be like too aggressive here, but the idea that there are too many formats, dude. You don't need to keep track of the formats you are not playing. If you're enjoying Modern and EDH, that's the thing you need to track. So if you don't like standard, I get it. And he says in the beginning of the article, it's his opinion. So we are not attacking the person, we are attacking his opinion. And that's a valid point. And I think we need to clarify to be seen not so aggressive. But yeah, the idea I think is his idea is like, I don't like this, so it has to disappear. There are many formats that I can keep track.
Enjoy what you can. Don't ruin other people's experiences to like cater to just your own. That's the weird thing about it. Is like
It very much is a
Go ahead.
trap that enfranchised players lay for the beginners, and some people just lay it for themselves. Like, they get into this mindset that they have to keep up with everything. Like, no, you absolutely do not. Like, you don't need to know every single card in every single set and build a new deck once a week. And it gets tiring. Like,
does.
how do you do that? You don't. If you don't like a format, so what?
That's a good summary right there. Oh man. Well, that's almost all the time we have for today. But really, audience, don't let that hold you back from letting us know how you feel and what you think as well. Leave us a comment. Let us know if you play standard, what you think of Sam Black's piece, if you've read it, or anything that we've discussed today. Zach Hill's piece is probably the better read. Go check that out. And I'll link both.
Can I pose one more thing before
ahead.
we call it a day?
Go ahead.
What would our game look like if they just eliminated standard? Would they
Jeez.
stop printing standard sets? Because then what would people who want to play limited play? Where would we get new cards for the eternal formats? Like, this idea that you just get rid of standard, it doesn't even make sense.
Nope.
Because you're still going to have to print the product. And if you're going to print the product, you might as well have a format that plays the product. So even if it's like 1% of the player base that's playing standard, there's no reason to just completely eliminate it, because the cards are still going to be there.
I think that was your final thought, Griff. You had to get it out though, man. I feel you. And that's a really good argument that I think the folks at home really need to please comment on that, y'all. Like, I want to highlight that one for sure. Let us know what you think of that, anything we've discussed today. I really want to thank each of you, Griffin Ryder, Luis Dragon, and I want to ask you guys to give your final thought. But Griff, you just gave yours, so I'm going to go ahead and turn to Luis. Luis, what is your final thought on the whole issue?
Some Magic community have a very hard separation between the casual players and competitive players. We each of us gatekeep the other ones, and well, that's normal, no? It always happens in humanity. Humans are like this. I don't know why. is our niche. But why? I mean, you're still, like Griffin said, you're still getting lore and cards with lore. The only cards with lore that are play are the standard ones. All the
Yeah.
other things that come out doesn't have a lord in the Magic and the universe of Magic the Gathering. I mean,
Yeah.
we are not going to see Doctor Who fighting with Chandra in, I don't know, in a new expansion. No, I mean, we have our lore and we have our story that is keep going and going and going, and that's standard. So if you kill a standard, you kill all the background of Magic. And one thing that makes Magic extremely interesting and extremely good, I did bought a lot of when I was in high school. I bought a lot of the books that
Oh
came with
yeah.
every set.
Yeah.
That came with the dice. What's legendary pack or historic pack? Algo así. Something like that. That came with
Yeah.
the book, some boosters, and the dice. I mean, stories were pretty good. I love the story for Mirrodin, for example, and I was very pissed when I realized that Mirrodin was destroyed into New Phyrexia, and I lost all the entire set when they came out. So
Oh
I came back to see videos and history. I mean, and that's the thing
yeah.
that gives Magic a more than, I will say, Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon. But Pokemon
Yeah.
has his lore. It has the anime and he has his history. But a lot of card games don't have like that lore behind them. Every set that has a history on advancing the story of Magic is in standard. So you cannot kill it because you will kill the principal thing that was Magic, that is cards with lore behind them. We have this is ¿cómo se dice? The text that is like flavor text.
Yeah. Flavor text.
I was gonna say saborizante, but uh, este, I mean, it will mean nothing if you don't have the stories behind them, and you don't love the flavor things on the dinos and the things that came like, oh yeah, this creature we killed you, or something like that, like the brontosaurus that came out that is enraged, and it says that when the excellence first tried to bring the dinos to the caves, they forgot that some dinosaurs were afraid of close-up spaces. I mean, it will lose all the magic, to be redundant, of the cards. I think
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
standard is the backbone of Magic, and you cannot take out the backbone of a game because it will disappear. It will lost the few or the little
Flavor.
heart that the game has.
Yeah, it's sabor. Like for me, and to put it really succinctly, everybody loves the gathering part of Magic the Gathering, but forgets about the magic, like you just said. And to add to that point, one of the things that, and this will be my final thought, one of the things that attracted me to the game, just like Luis, was the story, but also the art, the aesthetic, the world that it created, and all that plays a part. Flavor text, all of that. And yes, you do a significant harm to the game by taking that element away and just leaning on the franchises and universes beyond, which is what I imagine Sam Black is advocating for here. So I don't know. I just think that the game is good as it is, and I have fun playing it, and I have fun with new sets and early access. I don't want any of those experiences to go away for anybody who enjoys that. But thank you guys for being here, and until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.
Resist.